Good evening, friends, and a very warm welcome to the EVS Colloquium. This is the second of the semester, and we are very delighted to have with us today Professor Aseem Shrivastava. He's an eminent writer, teacher, and ecological thinker who also teaches at Ashoka. He has a doctorate in economics from University of Massachusetts, Amherst. He's currently teaching courses in global and Indian ecosophy at Ashoka University. Aseem has taught at universities in India and the USA, as well as at Nordic College in Norway. He now works independently, researching, writing, and lecturing nationally and internationally on issues related to globalization and its multiple ecological and other impacts. He's the author with Ashish Kothari of the books Churning of the Earth, Making of Global India in 2012, and Prithvi Manthan in 2016. Both of these books offer critiques of and alternatives to India's development strategy since 1947. Besides mentoring and guiding many students, Aseem writes regularly for publications such as the Hindu, Deccan Herald, Economic and Political Weekly, Seminar, Himal, Caravan, and Open Magazine. The title of his talk today is The Alphabet of Ecosophy, Rethinking Modernity.
Let's begin by contemplating the word ecosophy, because I'm sure it's new to almost all of you, barring my students who have been my guinea pigs in the recent past. Ecosophy refers to the wisdom of the earth. I'm quoting Raimundo Panikkar. Panikkar is or was a philosopher theologian of Keralite Catalan heritage, background. He grew up in Spain, and he has some of the most innovative ideas on the theme that I'll be speaking about today. I, however, supplement this idea with the idea of the wisdom of the earth as our home in the vastness of the cosmos. That is important to place in context. So it's not just the wisdom of the earth, but the wisdom of the earth as our home in the vastness of the cosmos. So that getting uprooted from this home and being moved, perhaps forcibly, to another planet in the solar system would constitute a severe violation of human freedom. What makes ecosophy so very different from both the dominant perspectives in which our ecological crisis is addressed today, that is to say, environmentalism and ecology, is the fact that it asks fundamental questions about the modern cosmology of the world in which we live in, wherein we are being persuasively led to believe that we can tackle the ecological crisis technologically by devising the sort of smart technology we need to colonize the moon or Mars or some other celestial body. Anyone, for instance, who goes along with Elon Musk when he says, and I quote, "We will colonize whatever we need to," unquote. And parenthetically, the reason for that is presumably in order to get the minerals for the batteries to run our smartphones and laptops. Such a person would be a votary of modern cosmology. Elon Musk tweeted as recently as July 2020, when Bolivia stopped his mining operations, he said, quote, "We will coup whoever we want, deal with it," unquote. In fact, such an invasive colonizing cosmology has become so much a part and parcel of the contemporary English language that we launch books and eat rockets. I refer to arugula salad, something we did not do some decades back, right? What I'm going to do now is to actually play you a song which has been sung by one of my students, Mridula Sridhar. And the song is about the earth. I want you to keep your eyes fastened on the particular image of the earth that is being represented here. And of course, enjoy the music. Just
abide with me, fast perceiving tide. The darkness deepens, Lord, with me abide. When other
one feels a bit hesitant to say anything after that. Um, but what I want to focus on here with a sober mind is the image of the earth that you just saw. First, it is very large. It's still an image, it's not the real thing. Remember that. It's very large, so close as to almost miss your eyes. And then it starts receding from you. And it goes away into the distance, right? And what does it become there? In the end, it all but vanishes. The famous blue dot of Carl Sagan. We have to decide a very simple question, and we have to decide it right this minute without any further delay. And that question is, are you on the blue dot or are you elsewhere? And if you're elsewhere, what do you call that place? You don't have to give the answer, but do contemplate it. So that's the main message I draw from Mridula's rendition. My interpretation of this version of Abide With Me, because it's been sung for 2 centuries and it's saved many souls around the world. My interpretation is that it's the raging cry of Mother Earth. And it's the last or penultimate step to the full-scale, full-blown wrath of Mother Earth. And any of us who know anything about gender should know that mother's wrath is a bit more fearsome than father's, right? So, so that's basically my take on that. Now, I want to sort of begin by talking about what I call, or rather what has been called by people before me, earth alienation, right? How we can be standing or walking on this earth and yet be completely alienated from it. So this is the first sort of alphabet of ecosophy, EA, right? Creatures of symbolic representation, that is to say human beings, that is to say with a spoken verbal language, are particularly vulnerable to such forms of alienation. The moment you call something X, you confuse the actual X with the representation of it, right? And so we mistake our word earth for the earth itself, or herself, if you prefer, right? We are taught in childhood, in our geography lessons, to twirl the globe around our fingers, with our fingers, right? And we imagine thereupon that we can stand somewhere out in space from where the earth herself can be twirled, right? That's the seduction of language. That's the seduction of representation. That's the seduction of the globe. That's the seduction of globalization of the earth. The earth was not always globalized, as many professors of economics, esteemed and Nobel laureates might believe. No, the earth got globalized very recently. We didn't have the technology to control human cognition to the point where the earth could be globalized in our imagination. That is a very recent thing. It dates back to, shall we say, the first journeys into space in the 1950s, and subsequently the American flag being planted on the moon in 1969, and so on. Here we are prone to what famous philosopher Alfred North Whitehead described as the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. The fallacy of misplaced concreteness is precisely when you take the representation for the represented, when you take the word earth for the earth itself. Abstraction, anybody who does science knows this, abstractions have enormous power. And once you render something abstract, you can play around with it in the realm of mathematics, which is another layer of abstraction. Manipulate things there, produce results, which you then impose upon the earth, right? Abstractions work in many different ways, and today we are taught and caught by the globally popular IBM tagline, let us build a smarter planet, right? When I was teaching philosophy in Norway, one of the things I made my students do was, over the summer vacation, go back to their countries. There were students from about 80 countries at the college I was teaching. Go back to your countries and bring back what version of this slogan, let us build a smarter planet, IBM's tagline, what version is playing in your country. And it was amazing the range of cultural diversity that a great, powerful multinational like IBM is able to mobilize on its behalf, on its marketing behalf. So there are at least 40, 50 different myths which are buried in this statement, which we used to go through. For instance, that the planet was built like a building is built brick by brick. So it must have a builder. So providence, or if you're a believer, then God or goddess, is merely a very, very sophisticated engineer, nothing more than that. Okay, there's no infinite, nothing of the sort, right? So there's lots of subliminal messages in a slogan like that, which all of us, and especially our children and grandchildren, are constantly imbibing with their daily media diet, whether it's on phones or computers or the television screen. Screen is the only common thing, but the other common thing is the message is the same. It looks different every time, but fundamentally it's the same message. And that is that we are on the threshold of becoming, in the words of Elon Musk, a multi-planetary species. And we need to do this in order to solve our environmental crisis. And this is what I'm saying is the reigning cosmology of the day, believed by many people in my family, for instance, believed by many of my students, for instance, believed very widely in the popular imagination. And all of this is premised on Francis Bacon's idea from 4 centuries ago of the conquest of nature. The conquest of nature is something which is a concomitant of earth alienation and vice versa. You cannot conquer something without alienating it first. For instance, you cannot conquer your child. You cannot conquer your parent. Nobody you love, nothing you love can you conquer really. You first have to alienate, you first have to objectify, then you can conquer, right? And then show your superiority. And a category from the realm of human affairs and human history has readily been transposed to our relations with the natural world. So conquest of one culture by another, that idea has traveled to our understanding of how we relate to, or can relate to, or should relate to nature, right? Uh, one of the sort of more serious pandemics of our time, because there's a cascade of pandemics in our time. One of the more serious pandemics at the cognitive level is that the success of the United States of America as a global power has become an example for every country in the world to want to become like America. And therefore, all the mythologies that lie in the frontier imagination of America have now become globalized. And everybody now believes in the same idea of expansion, of conquest, and so on. What this talk is about is fundamentally to show the cognitive implications of conquest, because conquest has profound cognitive implications. And this is consistently being missed in the discourses of ecology and environmentalism, which is what led me to Ecosophy. I was at a Greenpeace discussion maybe 10, 15 years ago, where somebody made a very pithy comment on today's state of affairs. You cannot live the right life in the wrong world. You cannot live the right life in the wrong world. How did the world get to become wrong is really the question to ask. But nobody's asking that question. We are trying to solve problems within this wrong world, what I call solutionism. The market does very well as a result. Whether or not the problem gets solved, you may be postponing the problem, you may be shifting the problem across time or space, but the market does well simply by selling whatever product is supposed to solve it, right? Meantime, the deeper thing gets worse, right? So the cognitive aspect of things, in other words, if we are not seeing the right world, you cannot solve anything ultimately. And this was, I think, the meaning of Einstein's remark: you cannot solve problems with the same mind or imagination or consciousness which gave birth to them. You got to travel a bit deeper. It's a well-forgotten remark today. So what is wrong with this cognitive imagination as it stands? What is wrong with the modern cosmology? Now, the thinker who has influenced me the most in this regard is Hannah Arendt. And Hannah Arendt's most poorly read book is The Human Condition. Very few people read it. They know about Eichmann in Jerusalem. They know about the origins of totalitarianism. There's a number of brilliant books she wrote. But The Human Condition, not many people have read. And it's taught in very few places in this country, certainly. What does she say? She says that the problem is ancient. The problem with modern cosmology is ancient. It goes all the way back to Archimedes in ancient Greece. And what does Archimedes say? If you remember, Archimedes was sort of putting a wager to the king, give me a place to stand and I will move the earth, right? Give me a place to stand and I will move the earth. That imagination, Arendt argues, has traveled all the way into the very heart and soul of modernity. How? So she argues that somebody like René Descartes, who is regarded as the father of modern philosophy, the French 16th, 17th century thinker, Descartes arrives at a simple certitude. Perhaps we would say today a simplistic certitude. He says, I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum, right? That is an Archimedean point for Descartes. That is to say, it's his point from where he is going to survey everything else in an objective way. So the very definition of modern objectivity, which comes straight from Descartes, is Archimedean. So that's how serious the problem is. Now, I want to give you a few examples of why or how I believe this is so important. So in the realm of politics, for instance, Thomas Paine, when he talks about the rights of man in the 18th century, is again doing the same kind of Archimedean thinking. There is an absolute, there is a universal from where everything can be studied in an objective manner. Adam Smith, the great grandfather of modern economics, when he talks about the impartial spectator in the theory of moral sentiments, is doing the same thing. John Rawls, Harvard University, when he talks about the veil of ignorance under which you judge different cultures with respect to their ethical value, that is again an Archimedean point. Thomas Nagel, the view from nowhere, is again an Archimedean point. So the power and influence of this one single thought across the length and breadth of Western culture since at least the 17th century is profound. And Arendt argues that with the arrival of the telescope, when Galileo invents the telescope in 1609, something revolutionary happens. You move outside the human mind. You're now able to see things you did not see before. You have enormously powerful optical devices with which to divine areas of the universe which were out of range earlier with the naked eye, right? And then over the centuries, she argues what has happened is humanity, especially modern Western humanity, has acquired Promethean powers of manipulating nature, of developing innovations and inventions in such a way as to be able to act into nature and the cosmos with profound consequences for ecology, as well as for culture on the rebound from that, all right? Uh, the idea that she sort of proposes is that once upon a time, humanity did what she calls natural science. That is to say, science concerned with the nature available on Earth alone. But as of the early 20th century, at least, humanity has moved to what she calls universal science. In other words, uh, actually, even Newton's laws of gravitation, for instance, enunciated in the 18th century, 17th century, even Newton's laws of gravitation are actually universal laws. They're supposed to be valid not only on Earth, but across the solar system and beyond. And certainly by the time you come to Einstein and relativity and so on, all of astrophysics is of the view that there are universal laws, which it's the task of physics to track down. And these laws are applicable not just on Earth, but across the universe. So I'm going to quote a short passage from Arendt, and just to give you a proper sort of textural feel for what I'm talking about. She says, whatever we do in physics, whether we release energy processes that ordinarily go on only in the sun, or attempt to initiate a test in a test tube the processes of cosmic evolution, or penetrate with the help of telescopes the cosmic space to a limit of 2 and even 6 billion light years, or build machines for the production and control of energies unknown in the household of earthly nature, or attain speeds in atomic accelerators which approach the speed of light, or produce elements not to be found in nature, or disperse radioactive particles created by us through the use of cosmic radiation on the Earth. And here is the punchline: we always handle nature from a point in the universe outside the Earth. I'll repeat, we always handle nature from a point in the universe outside the Earth. Without actually standing where Archimedes wished to stand, still bound to the Earth through the human condition, we have found a way to act on the Earth and within terrestrial nature as though we could dispose of it from the outside, from the Archimedean point. So now the Archimedean point is not a notional thing it was in the time of Descartes. It's been objectified. You have space stations, you have satellites, you have rockets, you have any number of ways in which to survey the Earth from the outside. And Arendt's point is that a surveyor's view of the Earth and a dweller's view of the Earth are two quite different things. And when the surveyor's view of the Earth becomes dominant and hegemonic, and the dweller's view of the Earth recedes into the background, something catastrophic is happening. And she says, we've lost the coherence and cohesion of the vision of earth and sky, right? That unified vision of creation in which the earth under your feet, as well as the stars above you, there is a kind of unity, there is a kind of wholeness which we have lost. And what have we lost it to? Well, we have lost it to, shall we say, a transnatural, man-made, highly processed world which has displaced the earth and it has displaced the sky. How so? Well, we don't look at stars anymore unless we are in a laboratory or an observatory. We don't look at the full moon. We don't look at anything up there because the halogens hegemonize our visual imagination and experience here. The neons and the halogens have kept us in this tunnel of human experience, and it takes some effort to actually do the unusual and go and see the embers and the stars, right? Now, the catastrophic consequences which Arendt has in mind were actually unfolding in the 1950s itself. So for instance, you take the hydrogen bomb tests in the Bikini Atoll in 1953-54, right? Which led Einstein and Bertrand Russell to write their Pugwash Manifesto for Peace and so on. What is going on there? Behind the hydrogen bomb is an understanding of the fusion reaction which happens only on the sun. It doesn't happen on Earth. And what are you doing? You have created a device which simulates the fusion reaction successfully, and you impose it on the household of nature on Earth, which is innocent of the reality of fusion. In other words, you have mistaken the Earth for a laboratory now. And in elementary philosophical terms, you've made what is called a category error. A category error both ontologically and ethically, right? And nobody seems to find this unusual anymore. And that's what Arendt is terribly exercised about. She says, therefore, and this is one of the main arguments in her book, we live in a world in which speech has lost its power. Think of what that means. Speech has lost its power. No wonder everyone is banging their heads against a wall in politics and failing all the time, and people are breaking their heads. Why should the powerful listen to any democratic sentiment when these are the scale of forces on which things are actually moving, right? So they would rather listen to the technological community, the technocrats, and what a friend of mine calls the cloud elites, right? So under such conditions, Arendt argues that modernity is shepherded fairly tyrannously by a corporatized state. And what remains of society is what we call modernity, and it's sort of collateral damage in some sense. That's why we call it the social sector today. Many of my students at Ashoka end up working there, right? After all the depredations and devastations of the long sustained ongoing conquest of 5 centuries of imperial life, you have, you know, the social sector. You have resource people. You have ministries of human resource development. When I was in convent school in Patna back in the 1970s, if we constructed a sentence like, the friend that invited me to Ashoka today is Mukul Sharma, there would be a big red circle around that, not a permitted preposition in the 1970s. The friend who, right? There's a difference between object and subject. Today, I've had students saying to me that in America, if you write who, you'll get a circle around that. So that's how much our cognition has been wounded by what is going on, and we seem to be napping through it all. I want to show you an image now, and this is an image of, it's actually from a class assessment. A student submitted this as an assignment, and what it shows is his understanding of what he calls the explosive consequences of Earth alienation and the Archimedean point, right? And try to see what is reality and what is illusion here. And try to visualize what is happening in the mind of the woman who sits there. So there is an image of the earth in front of her, and it lies in pieces, in 2 pieces at least. And meanwhile, and why is it like that? Well, because she's sitting on something which is real, feels real. She can't look under her or behind her. And that itself seems to be in pieces. And the choppiness of the waves around her seems to suggest that all mayhem has broken loose, right? So this is a sort of visual picture of what Raimundo Panikkar calls arrhythmia. Arrhythmia is a term from cardiology, when the heart rate is not steady, among other things. And Panikkar says that now the entire earth and all its ecosystems are suffering arrhythmia. And therefore, if we are suffering it too, there is no surprise. If, for instance, women cannot conceive when they want to, or for instance, your body develops strange symptoms all the time, your sleeping rhythms are terribly disrupted, all this comes under arrhythmia as far as Panikkar goes, right? And he says that, you can't possibly, I'm paraphrasing him, I'm using my own example, you can't possibly acidify the oceans and expect that our digestive tracts will not be acidified. The acidity that so many people are experiencing around the world, which is a leading cause of disease, if I'm to believe the doctors, that's directly correlated with the acidification of the oceans in the sense that they both have the same set of causes, right? Okay. I want to now conclude this part of my talk by quoting Franz Kafka. This is actually borrowed from Arendt's own discussion of the theme in her book, and the epigraph to her last chapter in The Human Condition is a very chilling aphorism from Kafka, and this is what he says. He found the Archimedean point, but he used it against himself It seems that he was permitted to find it only under this condition. I'll repeat it because it's a bit mysterious. He found the Archimedean point, but he used it against himself. It seems that he was permitted to find it only under this condition. And what I wish to say with this, or rather my interpretation of this, is the following. It is true that nature is innocent. It is true that the universe is innocent. It is true that human nature at bottom, I believe certainly, is innocent. That's why the law says, or the preamble to the law says, innocent until proven guilty, right? However, there are forces which get activated at every level of existence, whether it's the universe, the earth, a culture, a community, a family, an individual. There are forces which get activated the moment you try to see things from the outside, as it were. You can never get out of the universe. You cannot step out of this body. And the moment you try to have an outside in view, in other words, take your friend's place or your, partner's place or your parents' place or your children's place, if you want to take their place, you will create trouble for yourself. You will lose your innocence and you will in some ways corrupt your cognition. And look at the world around you, which is a growing victim of narcissism. What is narcissism, if not the concretization of the Archimedean point when it comes to the self, right? So instead of trusting an inside out view and looking into my friend's eyes to see myself, right? I try to enter his mind and see myself from there as though I was him. Trouble. This is the troublesome part. So, what the Archimedean point does is to habituate us to think that we can act upon the earth, we can act upon others, upon ourselves, forgetting all along that this is in fact impossible. That we can only act within nature, within each other, within ourselves, and live with the earth, with others, with ourselves, in the freedom, joy, and peace, which is the fullness of relationship. So a relational view of reality, for instance, of the kind Alfred North Whitehead proposes in Process and Reality and other volumes, is basically about this. It's about actually eliminating the Archimedean point. There is no objectivity of that sort which is consistent with human freedom in the ultimate sense. That kind of objectivity will turn human beings into objects ultimately, and which is what you see today. So that's basically my sort of conclusion to that. In the end of that section, I just want to say that Panikkar argues that this kind of earth alienation makes it very difficult for humanity to rise to its fullest faculties and actually deliver on the cosmic responsibility, as he puts it, that we carry. What is that cosmic responsibility? Very simple: to know that the earth is actually the only home of organic life in the universe, and to keep it hospitable and habitable, right? Now, I want to sort of move to a slightly different dimension in order to connect all this with what I call the riddle of life. Why are we here? What are we doing here? What the hell is humanity about? Were we born to just delete messages every morning from our mail accounts, cleaning drains like that day in and day out? Is that what we were born for? Or is there something else which we are missing consistently? And the same year that Hannah Arendt published The Human Condition, that is to say 1958, in obscure India, in an obscure city called Mumbai, at that time Bombay, there was a film that was produced called Solva Sal, 16th year. So it's a romance and, it's a sort of entertaining sort of film. But there's a particular song in that film, which on the face of it is very superficial. But once you start probing it, then the depth of philosophical meaning is equally obvious. Before I play that song for you, and I'm going to play it, I want you to just go through the lyrics, those of you who do not follow Hindi, so that you have a sense of what this song is about. So the song is called in Hindi or Hindustani or Urdu, Hai Apna Dil Toh Awaara. And it's been translated by my student Kartikeya Khetrapal and my father Umesh Shrivastava. In English, it translates to the vagrant or roaming heart. It's impossible to translate a song like this, and you know that poetry is notoriously impossible to translate. But here it is. This heart likes to roam. Who knows what it seeks? Called out by many a pretty face, it wriggled out of their embrace, was swayed by none. Artless and meek, O heart of mine, what do you seek? This fool is surely very odd, neither place of rest nor abode, separated from land and the sky on top. You see why I've highlighted that. Separated from land and the sky on top. For those of you who know Hindi, Zami se begana, falak se juda. A shooting star, where will it drop? I've seen the world but did not find any takers for this heart of mine. A wayfarer, still on its way, I wonder where this heart will stay. When it agreed to go along, a pastor was not to be found. So, in other words, when he does seek wisdom, he doesn't find anybody to guide him. Whenever made a wager, it lost. Forsaken heart, where will you stop? Right?
अपना दिल तो आवारा अपना दिल तो आवारा न जाने किस पे आएगा है अपना दिल तो आवारा न जाने किस पे आएगा हसीनों ने बुलाया गले से भी लगाया बहुत समझाया यही ना समझा हसीनों ने बुलाया गले से भी लगाया बहुत समझाया यही ना समझा बहुत भोला है बेचारा न जाने किस पे आएगा है अपना दिल तो आवारा न जाने किस पे आएगा अजब है दीवाना न दर्द न ठिकाना गमी से बेगाना फलक से जुदा अजब है दीवाना न दर्द न ठिकाना गमी से बेगाना फलक से जुदा ये एक टूटा हुआ तारा न जाने किस पे आएगा है अपना दिल तो आवारा न जाने किस पे आएगा जमाना देखा सारा है सबका सहारा ये दिल ही हमारा हुआ ना किसी का जमाना देखा सारा है सबका सहारा ये दिल ही हमारा हुआ ना किसी का सफर में है ये बंजारा न जाने किस पे आएगा है अपना दिल तो आवारा न जाने किस पे आएगा जो कभी राजी तो मिला नहीं काजी जहाँ पे लगी बाजी वहीं पे हारा हुआ जो कभी राजी तो मिला नहीं काजी जहाँ पे लगी बाजी वहीं पे हारा जमाने भर का नकारा न जाने किस पे आएगा है अपना दिल तो आवारा न जाने किस पे आएगा.
Now, on the face of it, it's a very simple song, but if you listen to each of the stanzas, it encapsulates what I call the triple alienation of humanity. The alienation from the self, the alienation from others, and the alienation from nature. Everything is present in this song. And which is why it struck me that I should sort of present my ideas about earth alienation through this. And the song ends on a strange note, which is to say, when he is ready, the protagonist here, when he's ready to receive wisdom and he's looking for someone to guide him, there is nobody to guide him because everybody is in the same railway coach, and that is obvious. And so what are the options here? And this railway coach is as good a metaphor for modernity as any. What are the options here? The options here are between a sort of cheerful illusion or a deadly nihilism, right? We're back to Friedrich Nietzsche, right? Earth alienation also implies alienation from the sky, which is there in the song, right? It also implies alienation from the community. It also implies alienation from the self. And nobody can solve this alone. You can only solve this if there is a solution together, okay? So the question arises, what do we do? How are we to live? What is the answer? What is the answer to this riddle of existence that modern society now poses? None of the seductions of the world seem to appeal to this protagonist. He has done what the Upanishads said you should do. Neti, 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 negates everything from the heart. But then what? What is he left with? And that's why I say either a cheerful illusion. In Hindi, in Urdu, there's a very beautiful line of Ghalib's. जन्नत की हकीकत हमें मालूम है लेकिन दिल को खुश रखने के लिए गालिब ये ख्याल अच्छा है, which very crudely translates to, I do know the reality of heaven, but to amuse my heart, this thought will do for the time being. Something like that. Somebody can do a better translation. So what is the answer? And I'm going to conclude by taking you through two pieces of poetry. One which some of our friends from the West would be familiar with is from Rainer Maria Rilke's Duino Elegies. And the ninth elegy of Rilke says the following. Earth, speaking to the earth, earth, is it not this that you want, to rise invisibly in us? Is that not your dream, to be invisible one day? Earth, invisible. What is your urgent command, if not transformation? Right? So in other words, he's speaking to the earth as to a mother, as to someone enormously more powerful than himself, as to someone who can understand, and is bringing in the possibility that the earth has dreams for us. The earth is dreaming us. My fear is that instead of meeting the earth's dream for us, we may be turning into one of her great nightmares, right? Now I'm going to hand over the mic to my student, Malvika Menon. And Malvika is a terrific Mohiniyattam artist from Kerala. recently moved to Bengal. And she's going to recite for us first in Malayalam and then the translation in English of a poem which is written by her guru in Mohiniyattam, whose name is Vinita Nedungadi. And the poem is called Bhumi Putri, and which translates in English to Daughter of the Earth. Malvika, you ready?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Just as Aseem sir gave an introduction, I'll first read out selected lines from this poem in Malayalam, so you get an essence of the poetry in the language it was written originally. And then I'll read out the same lines that have been translated to English now for all of your understanding. Bhumi Putri. Nyan Bhumi Putri. Kiridam dharicha Rajakumari. ഈ ഭൂമി എനിക്ക് സ്വന്തം. ബാല്യമില്ലാത്തവൾ, മഞ്ഞിൽ കുരുത്തവൾ, വെയിലത്ത് വാടാത്തവൾ, ഞാൻ ഭൂമിപുത്രി, കിരീടം ധരിച്ച രാജകുമാരി. ശിക്ഷിക്കുവാനല്ല, അഹങ്കാരത്തിന്റെ ആലസ്യത്തിൽ നിന്ന് ഉണർത്താനായി വന്നവൾ. ഞാൻ ഭൂമിപുത്രി, ചിലങ്കയണിഞ്ഞ കർമ്മദേവത. ഞാൻ പോകും, ഒരു പക്ഷെ വീണ്ടും വരാൻ. അമ്മയെ മറക്കുന്ന നിങ്ങളിൽ ആടാൻ ഞാൻ ഇനിയും വരും. കൂടുതൽ കരുത്തോടെ, കൂടുതൽ ഊർജത്തോടെ, മരണദേവതയായി. അല്ലെങ്കിൽ മനക്കണ്ണ് തുറന്ന് അമ്മയെ നമിക്കുന്ന നിങ്ങളിൽ ആടാൻ ഞാൻ ഇനിയും വരും. അനുഗ്രഹമായി, വരദാനമായി, ജീവകാരുണ്യമായി. What is the English translation? Bhumi Putri, daughter of the earth. I, Bhumi Putri, a princess adorning the crown, this earth my own. I am one without childhood, one whose soul emerges from snow, one who does not wither under the sun. I, Bhumi Putri, a princess adorning the crown, I come not to punish, but to awaken you from the lethargy of arrogance. I, Bhumi Putri, the goddess of karma, I will cease to be visible only to emerge once again. I will emerge once again to dance in those of you who forget mother. With more strength and energy, I will emerge once again as the Marana Devata, the goddess of death. Or I will emerge once again to dance in you who respects and senses mother. I will emerge once again as a compassionate ray of light, a blessing, a new beginning.
Thank you, Malvika. So that's a little offering from home, from India. Thank you for listening so faithfully and patiently. We have some time for questions and reflections. The scheduled time for ending this evening is 7:45, but I'll be very happy to stay on as long as people want to speak. Yes, Rupert.
So much, Aseem and everybody. Very powerful stuff. I wanted to go back to the early part of your talk, really. I'm very strongly in sympathy with your thought that we must maintain primarily a dweller's perspective and not a surveyor's perspective, which is a thought that for me comes very strongly through the philosophy of Maurice Merleau-Ponty, the phenomenologist. And I loved your thought that the globe, an actual globe that we can hold in our hands, that this is an immensely dangerous kind of representation. It pulls us into fantasizing, taking up a kind of external point of view. Yeah, what I was coming to is the thought that thought about the dangerousness of the representationality of the globe is an especially pertinent thought now as we enter into a decade where there is going to be a great deal of discussion, unfortunately, of so-called geoengineering, of the idea of engineering the climate of the entire planet as a fallback position from the failed endeavor to control our greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a very important thought to be having at this time, I think, and this is one of the key reasons why I agree with you in thinking of Arendt and especially of the human condition as a very important work for this time. And as I think you know, I've written about this in relation to the magnificent film by Cuarón, Gravity, which I think is a film precisely about this fantasy of escaping from the earth. But I did want to ask you one question, which is this. I wonder if you go a little far when you say it would be a restriction on our freedom to leave the earth. You say if we go to the moon or Mars and attempt to live there, we're actually reducing our freedom because our freedom is tied to the planet. I don't think people are going to find that a very credible perspective to say it's a restriction on our freedom rather than a potential increase in our freedom. I wonder if a better thing to say is to simply say, do you care so much for this supposed freedom that you want to leave behind and are not very worried about trashing the only place in the universe where we know that we can dwell safely and flourish? I wonder if perhaps that's all we need.
I missed the last sentence, Rupert.
Yeah,
can you repeat that?
I wonder if perhaps all that we need is to be able to say that it is not necessary to leave the earth. We have no reason to leave the earth, and it does not really in any meaningful sense enhance our freedom to leave the earth. It seems to me that may be enough, and that to say it restricts our freedom to leave the earth might strike people as not credible.
Okay, I think it all depends on who you speak to. If you speak to people in the metropolitan world who have some sort of a half chance of actually leaving the earth, then of course it expands their freedom if freedom is understood as the power to escape, which it is not ontologically in my understanding, on your understanding so far as I know you. But I think even if you go along with that operative definition of freedom, there's the possibility of escaping from this horrible prison that Earth is. Let's assume that for a minute. Who has a chance to escape? Only those of us who speak the language, who have the right color of skin, who have the right gender, blah, blah, blah. And there's a lot of different identities which play into that. And so if you speak to people like us, PLUs, then yes, sure, it expands our freedom in this very limited sense of allowing the possibility of escaping an inhospitable earth, an earth rendered inhospitable precisely by the forces which are going to propel you into space. But if you speak to the vast majority of humanity, and if you speak to a lot of the future, if they could speak here, if you speak to a lot of animals and plants and oceans and mountains and talk about the rights of nature and so on, if you include them in the discussion, in other words, if you have democracy, which you don't have at the moment, then what? What will they say? I'm going to ask you this, Rupert. Are you willing to exchange your mother for a better one on another planet? Yeah, so I'm not making this up because this was exactly what was said by the women of Raigad near Bombay. My mother-in-law is sitting here, Lalita Ramdas. She will tell you that there have been cases where women in Raigad wrote to Mukesh Ambani when the Reliance group was trying to acquire their land. And the letter said the following: we would like to acquire your mother. Name the price. Name the price. So it's a matter of cognition. How do you see things? Where are you standing when you see those things? What is the value of those things when you're standing in place X versus place Y? Okay. Einstein, I mean, it's elementary Einstein. So that's how I would tackle that. And further, I would take the offensive on this and I say, you know nothing about freedom if you think running away from the earth is freedom. That's lunacy. And you will want to escape Mars once you go there because you're going to destroy Mars. The other thing I'll say to Elon Musk is just wait a few years. You guys are doing a pretty good job of turning Earth into Mars. You don't need to travel there. You want to die on Mars? Just wait here. You know? Yeah, that's it.
I'll just say one more thing, which is the logic that you mentioned in your closing remarks. There is the logic of the Nolan film Interstellar, which I think is a terrible film, a sort of antithesis of the magnificent film Gravity, which I think expresses what both you and I think about this.
Yeah, in fact, I show Interstellar to my students on the recommendation of a student 3 years ago. And it has huge pedagogical value in terms of showing people how not to tackle the ecological crisis.
I had a question of my own. When you spoke about this whole obsession with using technology as a tool, and I know as an ecologist, I really, in the course of using technology, we are getting sort of controlled by technology too. So, your point about losing that connection with the earth and with nature, and trying to see it using technological tools instead of seeing it with your own eyes and smelling it with your own nose and feeling the earth. This kind of ecology is really dwindling. The number of people who teach this kind of ecology, the number of people who do this. And instead, the priority now, both in publication as well as in research, is to look at really large data sets, because you need really high-tech tools to analyze those data sets, and, forgetting that you need to go to the ground and really touch the earth to really figure out what that, even that remote sensing data set is saying. So I really felt that when you said, how we're really losing touch. And we are now getting controlled by all these technological tools rather than using them as tools. We are being overpowered by them. That was just a comment.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Ghazala. And that what you just said is a direct implication of Kafka's insight. If you look carefully at that aphorism, that's exactly what he's trying to say, that this is going to turn against you. You think you are in control, but no, wait a minute. You are being controlled by your devices. So you are in the age of screen slavery. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. It's not a building you can just walk out of and say you are free of it. So it's a trap. And as this old song of the Eagles says, we are all just prisoners here of our own device, Hotel California. So let's think about things another way, since I mentioned hotel. And here I'm really going to challenge those of you who truly believe in modernity. And I completely respect that because I have myself been a deep believer in modernity in the past. No longer, but in the past I have been. And here's my proposition. Some of you might recall Zhou Enlai, after the Chinese Revolution, is interviewed by a Western reporter. And he's asked the following question. Sir, what do you think of the French Revolution? And 160 years on, he says, it's too early to say. My way of sort of backgrounding that is to ask you the following question. Supposing you could achieve liberty, fraternity, equality for every citizen on earth, right? With the proviso that everybody stays in a service apartment or a hotel, exchangeable for any other around the world. Liberty, you can do everything as long as you don't step on other people's feet. Fraternity, you can go down to the lobby, you can go to the spa, you can go for walks in the park, etc. Equality, everybody has the same entitlements, endowments, etc. You achieve that. Shall we go for this? Shall we accept this? Would Dr. Ambedkar be happy with this? And supposing he is happy with it, what would we say to him is wrong with this? since we are short of time, I can supply my answer. What is wrong with this is very simple. You've lost all communion, potential for communion with the community, and you've lost all sense of ecology, what Ghazala was just saying. You have your feet somewhere on asphalt or tarmac or some other artificial surface. You're living in trance nature, you are in a trance, you're not free.
I would like you to go back, Aseem, to your conception of environmentalism, because it seems you, if I understood correctly, you portray yourself as introducing something which will stand in opposition to something you call environmentalism. And I would just like to understand better why you choose that way of presenting it, why you choose that as the opponent, and to explain my interest, let me just say a few words about where I come from, which is partly perhaps shared by you, Aseem, your years in Norway. When I grew up in the Nordic area, when I was young in the 70s, 80s, the environmentalism of that time was rather close in its way of thinking to the approach you presented as ecosophy here. But the main enemy, the buzzword that we thought as bringing us together and as being at the center of the new environmental movement was what we called industrial growth society. That was the term coined by friends in Norway. Sigmund Kvale was important in that debate, but it was more like an intuitive shared as a basic assumption, which was articulated then in various ways, that the ecological problems of our times are problems due to a crazy drive for growth, and an impossible drive for eternal growth. And then so that was the environment movement. That was environmentalism in the 70s and 80s of my part of the world. Then something happened. There was a co-option, a semantic overtake, a transformation of the environmental consciousness or awareness of the message through especially the Brundtland report on sustainable development. So that when in 70s, 60s, maybe earlier, everyone who was an environmentalist was critical of growth, economic growth, then the green flag that raised when the European Union was creating its constitution in the early 2000s, the green aspect of the constitution of the European Union was that the union is committed to sustainable growth, not even sustainable development, but sustainable growth. Now, if that is environmentalism, then that's what some people who carry the flag of environmental awareness and environmental responsibility would raise the flag of sustainable growth today. So that is how the tension within, or coming from sort of the green perspective, I would explain a tension, a problem we have, that some people carry the green flag but do something which seems absurd from the point of view of the critique I grew up with. Now, I just wonder how that fits, because I wasn't sure whether you have what your framework is and how that fits into the struggles you are part of. Is it much the same or very different? This is just about what informs your endeavor today. But thank you. It's so great to share with you here. I'll close my mic and can't speak, but I can listen.
Thank you, Thomas. There's a huge, large background to all that I said here, and I tried to be brief. So obviously I have to skip a lot and assume a lot in order to be able to say what I wish to say. And one of the things I would have written 10 pages on and spoken an hour about by itself was why environmentalism as it's practiced today by the mainstream has to be rejected. I'm going to be brief here also and just go back to the economics I learned. I did my PhD in environmental economics. And at that time, I did believe that that is the way to go. 25 years ago, I did believe that sustainable development is not just a notion, it's a potential reality. It has to be fought for. I believe development itself is possible. Till I understood, and it took me 10 years of unlearning of economics to understand that the idea of development itself is an imperial idea. It was never meant to actually develop anybody. It was meant to create markets for global corporations and to draw resources of the world. So in the sort of transition from one colonial ideology to another, here is the progression in my mind. First, you have the Christian mission, then you have the white man's burden. And after the war, once the United States rises to the throne, then you have democracy, development, human rights, right? None of those are realities of the day. All of those are mostly fiction. These are imperial ideologies. And then I understood that the Brundtland Report is basically how the elites of the world, which is to say the Rothschilds and the big banks and the cloud elites, how they have internalized the environmental concerns in order to control public discourse in their favor. Now, there's a lot more to say about it. There's a book by, I think his name is Steve Hiatt, and it's called A Game as Old as Empire. It's a bunch of people who worked in the World Bank writing about the bank from the inside. The World Bank is the author of Modern Development from 1944, and everybody Amartya Sen downwards follows the discourse. They do not challenge the categories. They cannot think outside them because they get their prizes from those categories. Their loyalty to those categories is exactly what endears them to the establishments which award those things. So I became a severe critic of Sen, who I knew a little from my college days and my days in Amherst. And I believe that his book, Development as Freedom, is nonsense, is basically nonsense. I'm going to be brief, and that's why I'm being sort of, I might seem arrogant. I'm not. I've thought about it, and I can talk about it for a long time, but I just believe that it's ideology that he's peddling there. Environmentalism, in a nutshell, is an afterthought. The environment is an afterthought for the economist. And I speak here as a victim, because for many years, I practiced this notion till I realized it's just something you think about after you have decided how to arrange the economy and everything. You're not thinking of society, you're not thinking of nature, you're not thinking of anything other than growth of the bottom line for a handful of people. And you have the power to control global media discourse to actually help more and more people see things the wrong way. Hence, you have a cognitive crisis, And that's when I turned to Tagore, that's when I turned to Gandhi, and I found my answers. And when Gandhi writes in 1909 that this civilization is a 9-day wonder, I understood. He's not being dogmatic. Those who don't understand that are bought out. Their souls are sold. That's why they can't see it. The least quoted line in Gandhi, there are two lines in Hind Swaraj which are not quoted by anybody. One is, money makes a man helpless. And the other is, we are turning away from God. Sacrilege to mention that in a so-called secular age. So there's a huge amount of secular fundamentalism going around, masquerading as something else, okay? So I think we have to take the bull by the horns now. We don't have time, and we have to have our own categories. If there was time, I would introduce you to at least 4 other notions of ecosophy, which I teach. I teach them with confidence, although I haven't vetted them with colleagues, except perhaps Rupert and a few others. And the concepts are species solipsism, homo abstractus, arrhythmia, and transnature. And with these 5 concepts, I think you have a view of the world which is adequate. With these categories, you can describe the world phenomenologically as accurately as is possible to do in a Whiteheadian sense. And then you are in business, so to speak. Then you have a battle. Then you can fight, not with their categories. So to quote Michel Foucault, you don't bring down the master's house with the master's categories. I'm paraphrasing. Yeah. So that game is done. And I think that only those who are so deeply healed in it would believe all this greenwashing that's going on around the world in the name of saving the planet. Save yourselves for a change. You can't save the planet. You're in no position to. You're only in a position to destroy it. So first get out of that position, because your position itself is wrong.
Aseem, mine will be a different voice here. You have, in the last hour and 15 minutes or so, blessed us, given us a gift of a love letter to our future. I'm wanting to say to you how beautiful and how clear and powerful and loving and healing are all of the comments and the answers that you have given. And about 3 years ago, we were standing together in the near Bangalore at the Fireflies ashram, and I felt your brotherhood at that moment, and it has been there ever since. And there are two other people on this screen, John Cimino and Bill Vitek, both who are here because we had a chance to let them know about this talk. And I'm so looking forward to introducing you to them at a time when we can all be together. And I love you, Aseem. You have been, you are our brother, and this is, in saying that, I am saying that this is the way to make these tremendous shifts that need to be made, is to acknowledge that with all the wonderful the wonderful quotes and points of view and things that brilliant and beautiful people have written over the centuries, that it comes down to these relationships that we have, and that the strength is flowing now across, through this screen to me. And I'm so grateful to you for this time together.
Thank you for that very generous appreciation, Sam. I love you too.
You spoke about objectifying and, the alienation from the place where we are dwelling. Some thinkers say that, this stems from doing the same with the body itself, objectifying, alienating. What do you think of that? And what do you think is a way out of this whole problem you have framed? Thank you.
I'm so happy that you raised that, Anish. I haven't mentioned the body, but it's been constantly there in my subliminal thoughts. And I'm a great admirer and, devotee of Wendell Berry, as some of you know. And Wendell Berry has this fabulous book called The Unsettling of America, right? Which one of my students beautifully described and recommended to me when I had not read the book a few years back as the Hind Swaraj of America. This should be America's Hind Swaraj. That's how great a book it is, and that's how obscure it is. And Wendell Berry, be it said, I went to the most radical economics department in the US at University of Massachusetts. I gave up a full scholarship at Yale University to go and study Marxist economics at Amherst. And guess what? In my 8 years in that department, nobody mentioned Wendell Berry even once. So that's the kind of pariah status he has among US radicals. So that tells you something about the state of the left. The old book of Paul Mattick, old left, new left, what's left, that's the state of the left. So Wendell Berry is among the few people I've read who engages with ecology with the body constantly engaged. The body is not out there. The body is not alienated as in any Cartesian paradigm, right? The body is very much integrated with his feeling, with his thinking. It's all one. If people understood the one, he wouldn't have to write those books. The less people understand the world, the more books have to be written, the more trees have to be cut, the more batteries must burn out so that people can understand the obvious, right? But what Wendell Berry does is to show exactly what the implications are for this Cartesian view of the world, which actually has been widely internalized and from childhood, because that's the science you learn. That's the way you learn to interpret nature. Like Ghazala was saying so accurately, hardly any of us know how to smell a rose anymore. We don't really. We don't know how to look at stars. We don't know how to feel the full moon. We are not sensitive enough. And the reason for it is intellectual repression, or rather emotional repression by the intellect, right? Now, the ancients, both in India and in the West, or in China, you look at the ancients of any culture, you look at indigenous people today, what is their measure? Do they take a thermometer? Do they take a barometer? Do they take some meter somewhere? No. The body is the measure. Their feet are so sensitive, they walk without any footwear through very thorny forests. I've been with Adivasis in jungles around the country where is near, or when an ant is about to bite them or something like that, and they can take evasive action. Talking about bodies, during the tsunami in 2004 December, a number of tourists from Nordic countries, especially Sweden, were sunbathing at the beach in the Andamans. And the waves came and took them. The Jarawas, the Ongols, the local tribes, they were not to be found anywhere near the beach. Where were they? They had already made for the highlands the previous day. How did they know danger is near? Well, they looked at the elephants, they looked at other large animals, and they were all moving in a certain direction. The modern mind would say this is superstitious, they are afraid of things. Turned out they were right. Their instincts were absolutely clued in to the ecology in which they were living, and many Swedes with PhDs under their belts died. What is literacy? Why do we want it? Ask Amartya Sen, ask the World Bank. So the less sensitive we become to our bodies, the more imperiled we become with respect to the actual living, breathing, infinite earth. And I mean infinite not in the material sense. I mean it entirely in the metaphysical sense, in the Rilkean sense. Rilke is a poet who actually senses what the animals are saying, what the plants are saying, what the clouds are saying. Rabindranath senses. It's not about reason. This imperialism of reason has caused so much damage. And if you read Iain Mcgilchrist's The Master and the Emissary, recommended to me by Rupert sitting here, fantastic book, because the one book I've read which actually gets to the heart of the matter as to what is wrong with modern cognition. Cognition is fundamentally flawed today because you're being educated from childhood to not notice your own responses, to not notice your own feelings. All that is very subjective, as my lazy Ashoka students would say. The good ones will never say that, but the lazy ones do say that. All that is very subjective, and you dismiss it. If you want to do music, go and do it in some other place. So the desensitization of the body is a concomitant of earth alienation. Merleau-Ponty, you mentioned, Rupert. The entire thing is about seeing the body as the measure. The ancients in India, the Buddhists, for instance, who talked about Maya. What is Maya? Maya means measure, right? That's what it means. In what sense? So Maya is measured in the same sense in which a shadow measures a tree, right? And to see the shadow as shadow and the tree as tree is what it's all about. Easier said than done. Easier said than done. When we are living in a mind full of abstractions, then we are full of shadows and we are somehow groping our way in the dark. What is reality? It's a difficult question to face, when this is the scale of shadow thinking, So to answer your question in very brief, Anish, I would say that, the alienation from the earth and the alienation from the body have gone together. This is not a physicalist or a materialist civilization. Let's be very clear. This is a big mistake all the way since Marx onwards. This is a civilization devoted to the abstract. I'm writing about this in my book on Tagore, which is hopefully going to be, in print next year. The civilization is devoted to the abstract. It's read the infinite completely wrong, and the living infinite, which is what human beings and all living creatures actually seek, cannot be rendered abstract. It has to be lived. It has to be felt. And then the thought that comes out will be a very different thought from the one which visits us now. Yeah.
I have one very short question, which comes to mind when you speak about Gandhi and Hind Swaraj. And then I have a comment. The short question is, there's this quote I have through oral tradition. I have it from, I think, from Ashish Nandi, who quoted in conversation in Delhi some years ago, Gandhi saying that characterizing modernity as a civilization which tries to make science and technology so good that man wouldn't need to be good. I just wonder, and it's a quote I love and use a lot, and I haven't found it in the writings I have. Maybe it is there in Gandhi, so I just would like to have help with locating it, and also like to have your comment, maybe Aseem and others perhaps in this room, this gathering, would recognize the quote and could also judge about its accuracy. But for me, it fits my idea of Gandhi's critique of modernity, and it fits my idea what is essential to Gandhi's critique of modernity. But whether it is there or not, I don't know. That's one point. The other point is whether you think it fits your interpretation, your understanding of Gandhi's critique of the modern West. Namely, the modern West tries to make science technology so good that man wouldn't need to be good. So that was the question, not as short as I hoped. The comment I have is a worry, Aseem, in how you place yourself in the discourse of reason and rationality, where, I just wonder how much you would stick to, you mentioned a thing you called imperialism of reason. And just to report where I stand on this, the thing I try to do with my guru, Wittgenstein, in the discourse of reason is to show that the new ways, I mean, it's an old topic, of course, but to articulate again in what respects and how the techno-scientific idea of reason, going back to Bacon and others, how that idea of reason is a betrayal of reason and not its realization. So wisdom traditions, like you mentioned, are sort of victims to a reductive imperialism of reason, not to imperialism of reason. And I wonder whether you agree with that, or whether it's something you would challenge. Thank you.
Of course, Thomas. I mean, again, I have only one tongue and it can only wag in one direction at a time. I should have said the imperialism of enlightenment reason, shall we say. So much so that somebody like Johann Wolfgang von Goethe would not stand for that kind of imperialism of reason. So my answer to Immanuel Kant's sapere aude would be, how about saying sapere amare, dare to love, okay? Is there something higher than reason? You bet. That's the point. What is it that is higher than reason? And in which case, if you access it or if you speak from there, how would you use reason, right? Pascal, Pensees, says two indulgences: to use only reason and to dispense with reason, right? So who decides? I mean, what is the definition of reason? You can't define these things, can you? But reason works in all different ways. I mean, but remember what William Blake says: reason is merely the circumference of energy, right? So to put reason in its place is terribly important. The question is, who will put reason in its place? Not power, love. And then we'll be right. So like Tagore says somewhere, he says in Stray Birds, actually, he says, reason used without love is like a dagger held without a handle. It'll cut the hand that holds it. So that's my take on reason, very briefly, because it's a huge topic, as we know. But roughly, that's how I look at it. I mean, the West has no monopoly on reason, certainly not the modern West. Reason is ancient. Reason has been used by all cultures in all different kinds of ways. It's not like Kant, Hegel, Marx invented reason. No. So once you take a broad enough view, there is plenty of things to fight over and to create from, and with the help of reason. So reason is a wonderful tool, but let it be said, it's a tool. It's either a tool in the hands of power or it's a tool in the hands of love. Where are you in relation to this? Let's talk about that. Answer to your first question, Thomas. It is certainly my understanding of Gandhi, as well as Tagore, that their understanding of the modern West and what goes wrong in the West routinely is that the belief is very deep set, that we just have to arrive at the right system. Let's call it socialism or communism or some other ism, and then everything will be fine. In other words, a system insulated against the potential of human evil, so that the Iagos and the Macbeths can be neutralized, right? And that's not how it is. God creates potential for evil every time a baby is born. Arnold Toynbee talks about it in Study of History. Okay, so this illusion that the West has, and the whole modern world, my brother included, my brother's a CEO of a company, has, is that we have to get the systems right. He's constantly frustrated with the Indian potential and talent for chaos, saying, why can't we get our systems right? And I secretly laugh because thank God we have the potential and talent for living in chaos. Fascism will never work here. Modi will fail. You take it from me. So there's a lot of wrong-headedness on this, which goes around. And Gandhi and Tagore understood this ages back. Who listens to them? Who listens to them? Except for national anthem or flag raising or some other nonsense that goes on Republic Day and so on. They are persona non gratas in today's cultural and intellectual landscape. But it's very much in the spirit of Gandhi, and you'll probably find at least 100 places where Gandhi is saying those kinds of things, maybe not in the same words in which you put them, Thomas. In Young India, in Harijan, in a number of magazines that he had started and used to write for, he has said those kinds of things. So very much in that spirit, that remark you quoted. Ghazala, yes.
Yeah, so given all the things you've said in your talk about science and globalization, how they've had a rather negative role, largely in many situations, what role do you see for science and for globalization in ecological revival? Do you see some hope there in these two entities?
Yeah, if I may say so, science is too important to be left to the scientists. Science is terribly important. If by science, giving it the best meaning, we understand by science a systematic study of the natural world, including ourselves, our bodies, and everything, with one major caveat. And it's a very big caveat, because I read a lot of Bacon last year, Francis Bacon. I went to the sources in order to acquaint myself with the language, because I was reading it indirectly in Carolyn Merchant or Mary Midgley or Evelyn Fox Keller or somebody. and I wasn't getting the sort of the nuances. You need to read Elizabethan English to actually understand what Bacon was about, because he was a great mind. There's no doubt in my mind, but he was an equally flawed mind. And somebody who kills a hamster, and then goes to freeze it, and in the process he dies of cold, tells you, I mean, the way a man dies tells you a lot about the way he lived. And Bacon died in rather ignominious circumstances. So, Bacon has to be understood, and where Bacon went wrong and why he went wrong. I have a certain view of it, ill-informed as it is, because I haven't read everything. I've read The New Atlantis and a few other things. Science has to be rescued from such people, because Bacon proposed the following, and correct me if any of you know better, because I'm sure many of you will know better. Bacon proposed constrained experiment, something which Immanuel Kant, in the preface to the Critique of Pure Reason in the second edition, in the preface, he points out specifically the greatness of Bacon comes from the fact that he proposes constrained experiment for the first time in the history of knowledge. Immanuel Kant says, you had a light with which you could make advances rather than keep going round in circles as humanity has been going round for centuries. So that's how highly Kant rated the constrained experiment. Now, the difficulty is, the moment you think of that, you have to ask yourself, why do you want to know something? No, I'm just curious. I don't trust that answer. Certainly not anymore, and certainly not at my ripe young age of 60. I don't trust that answer. Just curious? No. There's more important things than curiosity. Thank you. So what is the motivational matrix from where science emerges? What are the ethics of actually doing science? Is it okay to take some rats from somewhere and put them in a lab and electrocute them to find out how their bodies feel afterwards? Is it okay to catch a bird in the sky and do the same to it? Because this is the way science has been going. And Carolyn Merchant does a terrific job, as good a job as I've seen anyone do in Science and Nature, as well as The Death of Nature. So there is a place for science, but it has to be a completely different thing. I mean, there has to be a scientific revolution within scientific methodology. This is not Thomas Kuhn I'm talking about something else. Okay, there's something fundamentally messed up in the way science was conceived by Bacon, and the legacy is a very long and cruel shadow, which the world has had to suffer for 4 centuries. The evil that men do lives after them. So, so this is my brief take, Ghazala. It's a huge question. I am very persuaded by people like Heisenberg and Schrödinger, who I've read a lot of, physics and philosophy and books like that. The Hibbert lectures that Schrödinger gives in Oxford in 1956 are terrific. What is life, mind and matter? All those are clues and cues. David Bohm's work, his dialogues with J. Krishnamurti, those are seminal texts for me to understand the place of science and also reason. We can't dispense with these things. We need to know, but the question is, how much do we need to know about what and why? If that question is not asked, then science will by default moral gravity be used by power, and it'll be used in the most vicious ways to make bombs and weapons. Leonardo da Vinci, I mean, you can't question his credentials. Da Vinci forecasted many of the horrors that science and technology have generated in the 20th and 21st centuries. Lewis Mumford, in his book, Technics and Civilisation, quotes from there. 6 centuries ago, he could foresee all the problems that would arise unless people understand how dangerous science is. There's a reason why William Blake wrote, art is the tree of life, science is the tree of death, and why he attacked Newton, Voltaire, Locke, the looms of Locke, and Newton's world he described as sheathed in dismal steel, and so on. I mean, that depth of revulsion Blake had towards science, which was innocent by the standards of today's science. where if you're not vaccinated, you must be anti-scientific. You must be an idiot. That's why you are. And you're a danger to society. So a patient who is not willing to get vaccinated, first of all, a human being is potentially a patient, and every patient is a potential suspect. So every human being is potentially guilty. This is the problem. The ethics is gone. And why has it gone? We have to ask that question of the scientists, of the community which holds the power to decide what truth shall be, as though they have any control of truth. Science can give us very good explanations for realms of fact in certain areas. And beyond that, we are all in the dark most of the time. I mean, Einstein himself said it's a candle in the dark. I mean, drop of knowledge in the ocean of our ignorance and so on. Where does all that humility go today, So when it becomes a vehicle of power, then you might as well do eugenics and produce intelligent babies and smart fools and so on.
Thank you very much, Aseem. It was really very fascinating way of looking at things, and provided us with a different lens altogether. Thank you very much for talking to us today.
Thank you, Ghazala. Thank you to everyone for making time at the end of the day. In India, it's the end of the day and people must be tired. And thank you.
But I must say that your talk has had a really good attendance today, and we're very happy to see that. Yeah.
Well, I hope it was worth it for people. And thank you so much for your contributions and participation, all of you.